to this computer. Cool. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Planet FPL, the world where everything revolves around Fantasy Premier League, although right now it revolves around a lockdown. My name is Suj.
My name is James.
And we are...
When it goes on YouTube, mate, it's the other way round. He's pointing the wrong way, so I need to point that way.
Does it flip?
Yeah, I need to point that way, and you need to point that way.
I never even noticed. That's bizarre.
The people keep moaning on YouTube, and you said you couldn't be bothered to change it round.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. Well, today's People's Poll Day, James, which means we are discussing a topic of everybody else's choosing.
Yeah, apparently so. So we did a best 11 idea, and I'm going to be really honest. The one that I didn't want to win won because it's the hardest one. It's brutal.
Yeah.
We are.
Some areas is hard. Some areas are quite easy, but there was a few that are pretty tricky.
Yeah, so there were 4 options. One didn't get much traction, which I'm also pleased about because it might have meant the inclusion of someone I don't like, which is the idea of picking a best Premier League 11 with players who have played for at least 2 London clubs. For those who are wondering, I quite comfortably could have gone with Gary Cahill and William Gallas at centre-half, just in case you were wondering. The other 2 are probably look like they're likely to go back into a vote for next week because they finished joint second, which was 1 club Premier League men, which I'd set as a limit of they could only have played for 1 Premier League club and must have given at least 10 years service to that club.
That would have been quite a small pool of people in the end.
Yeah, you've obviously got people like Steven Gerrard. I wouldn't have discounted Steven Gerrard for the fact that he played for LA Galaxy, for example. It's one other club overseas. So, but someone like Beckham would have perhaps just missed out, maybe, for example. We'd have to look at that sort of thing. The other one, which was popular and I thought would probably win, actually, was an idea of a best ever Premier League 11 that included no European players. So North, South America, Asia, Africa, Oceania.
That's the one I voted for, actually.
I thought that would have been cool, actually. I thought that would have been really good. I think that would have been tough. You think straight away people like Heung-min Son at Spurs, right? You think, I've got to have an Asian player in, haven't you? But you're leaving out Mane or Salah. That is tough, right?
Alexis Sanchez.
Exactly. You know what I mean? Exactly. And then you start thinking back further. So I think that one would have been really cool. The winner is the Brits abroad 11 idea, which this is not restricted to just the Premier League era. It is a best ever 11 of players, British players, so not Republic of Ireland, who have played overseas.
Yeah.
Should we go for it, Suj?
We shall. You put together a full 11.
Yeah.
And we can pick it apart. I think there's certain players that you had on your list that automatically I would have had on my list. I think are a definite given. There's other players that you might want to include in the list that you haven't. And I know it was difficult to narrow down the midfield, especially the attacking midfield. I suppose what inspired this? Is it a case of British players aren't traditionally regarded as going overseas a lot, really, are they? If you look at the number of players in our league versus our players in foreign leagues, way less.
And the majority have done it have been unsuccessful, if we're honest. There are players in this team that I'm going to tell you who have gone abroad and been unsuccessful, let's be honest. There were a very few handful, basically all attacking midfield players, who have gone away and done very well. The idea came about just from basically thinking, well, shit, no one can go anywhere. No one's flying abroad. Let's talk about people going abroad.
Yep. And did you measure success purely on trophies, or are you looking at the impact that they had in the team and that kind of thing as well?
A little bit of both. There's some cutting corners and stuff. For example, like defensively, minefield. Before I say anything else, I'd ask anybody to sit there and think of great goalkeepers or defenders who are British who've gone abroad and done well. There aren't any.
You look at Jonathan Woodgate, had so many injuries.
Bad, mate.
Kieran Trippier's only just moved abroad. I don't think he's got anywhere close.
Not having it. No.
Yeah, he's not. He's not even there. Yeah, agreed with you on that as well. In goal, you started with Joe Hart, I guess, because who else?
Everyone's laughing already, but I don't really know what the alternatives were. I think Chris Woods might have had a spell with an American club. The other one, like Scott Carson's had quite a long spell in Turkey. Sod that. I'm not picking a best ever team with Scott Carson in goal. I'm picking Joe Hart for his 1 year loan with Torino, where he conceded the fourth amount of goals in Serie A. But was at that time a Manchester City player, and previously at Manchester City had obviously done very well. So I think for this one, if I was to judge goalkeepers at their peak who are British, who have gone abroad, Joe Hart's actually probably the pick. I really don't know where else to go with that.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think it's funny considering how in the 90s we had so many good goalkeepers. You talk about Chris Woods, David Seaman, Tim Flowers. Like, goalkeeping is a position that I think traditionally we've been fairly good in terms of strength and depth, but they don't seem to get picked for overseas teams, perhaps because of the style of football. They're required to be better with their feet because it's not an all-action game, right? The pace of the game is slower. So the goalkeepers are getting the ball at feet much more than they are maybe in the English game.
You even think not
traditionally
just
in the back day
not just England, but take Neville Southall at Wales, Pat Jennings, Northern Ireland, Scotland with the likes of Andy Gorham, Jim Leighton. Shit.
We had strength and depth, but they just never went overseas. Interesting.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
I obviously haven't included English players that played in Scotland, for example.
Yeah, I mean,
Chris Woods had a very long spell at Rangers.
That would be the loophole of all loopholes.
Well, that wouldn't be Brits abroad, as far as I'm concerned.
Nah. Defence. You did manage to put together a few defenders and some really good defenders. Des Walker, top of the list.
I've put together a back three, and I'm not going to lie, they're all cheats. Des Walker, I would have as right-sided centre-half, was signed by Sampdoria the summer after they played Barcelona in the European Cup final for it was about 1.5 million, I think, from Nottingham Forest. Des Walker was quality, mate. You know, he played a good 50 odd times for England.
Class
in an era that was very competitive. The reality and honesty on this is Des Walker did not have a successful period at Sampdoria. He basically spent the majority of the season playing out of position at fullback, and within a year returns to Sheffield Wednesday in the Premier League. And Sampdoria made about £1 million profit in that period, which showed how football transfers were absolutely booming, that he'd not excelled at Sampdoria, but the demand of the Premier League, and he was an England regular, was getting straight back. And he had a decent spell at Sheffield Wednesday, but at Forest in those early 90s, he was fantastic. They used to sing, "You never beat Des Walker," and sometimes you played against him and it felt like it. He was a top player.
And the interesting thing was he was always regarded as, he didn't have a lot of pace, did he really, Des Walker? But it was just timing.
Yeah, Des was quick, mate.
Was he?
No,
I
was
always
quick.
thought
he was quick.
The stigma attached to Des Walker was that he wasn't quick necessarily, but his timing and his positional play was to get him out of trouble.
His timing was fantastic, but he had the recovery pace as well. Des was not slow. He could go, mate. And he would need to do some covering for this team, I think, with the way I've set it up. I've also cheated. Go on.
You've added Bobby Moore in.
Yeah, I'd go Bobby Moore, left-sided centre-half. This is a complete liberty as well, because Bobby Moore had a spell following leaving English football in 1977, where he played about 40-odd games in what would have been America's version of the MLS then, with Seattle Sounders and somebody else. And it's a cheat, but when you compare some of the others, like if you look at centre-halves who've had a high number of appearances overseas, you start looking at like Paul Elliott, who had a spell in Serie A, and he was dog shite at Chelsea, mate. I don't care. He's not going in this team. I'm not having it.
You didn't consider Jonathan Woodgate then? I know he had a lot of injuries and but when he was at his peak, he was a decent player.
Johnny Woodgate was great. I mean, we had him for a small period at Spurs. He was terrific. His best spell was obviously before he went to Real Madrid at Leeds. A great player, suffered badly with injuries. But all anybody remembers about the Real Madrid spell is the own goal and the sending off on his debut. Nobody remembers anything else.
Yeah, because he played.
So for me on that, he couldn't go in.
He didn't play consistently enough, to be fair.
Correct.
Who else have you got at the back?
The other centre-half is Il Gante, the gentle giant. And this is a cheat, really, because it's John Charles, who for basically all of his period overseas played as a centre forward. But during his career, he scored an astonishing amount of goals when he went to Juventus for, I think it was £65,000.
£65,000.
In 1957, which back then was humongous, right?
Yeah.
And he tore it up. In Juventus' centenary year in 1997, he was voted their best ever overseas player.
67.
No, in 1997 was the centenary year of Juventus.
Right, okay.
They had a vote for their best ever overseas player at that time.
Right.
Whether that would still be the same now with likes of Zidane, Cristiano Ronaldo added and all that, I don't know. But John Charles was voted their greatest. I don't think he was ever booked in his career. He got that nickname in Italy of the Gentle Giant. He was most predominantly known in England for playing for Leeds United at both centre-half and up front. His goal-scoring record, despite playing half of the time at Leeds at centre-half, is still like 1 in 2. The guy was a joke. A lot of people think he was the best footballer of the 50s. Certainly a lot of British people would tell you that.
I think John Charles is one of those where a lot of casuals will have never heard of him or come across him, but people that really are into the game and know it put him up there in top 10 players of all time kind of stuff. He really was considered a legend at the time.
What I was astonished to see, and I don't know if it was impacted by the amount of time that he did spend in Italy, was he only played 35 times for Wales. And he's considered arguably Wales' greatest ever player, other than, you can still put him on the pedestal with a couple of the current ones who've done well in the last 20 years. But I think from historical, a lot of people would say John Charles was perhaps Wales' greatest ever footballer. The people that are old enough, and a lot older than me and you, Suj, rave about him, mate.
Of course, yeah.
He was one of the best players in the world. So to fit in as many attacking players as possible, we're picking the John Charles that could play centre-half. In between Des Walker and Bobby Moore.
And I mean, look, Juve at the time were the top team in Italy. You won a lot of trophies there as well, right? I think 3 or 4 as Coppa d'Italia, whatever else. So he was a trophy winner with Juventus as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Should we move on to this brutal midfield area?
Well, we could just get the attackers out of the way and then come back to the midfield if you wanted to.
No, let's run through the team properly.
All right, go on then. Midfield. I'm gonna give all. Are you playing a 4-4-2 or 3?
No, this is 3-4-1-2. I've gone for.
Okay, 3-4-1-2.
So the two wide players are going to have to act as wing backs.
So you got Beckham and Bale, your wide backs?
No, I played Gareth Bale as the one behind the front two.
Okay.
I mean, see, I could have taken more liberties and put Gareth Bale at left back in this team, couldn't I?
Yeah.
From his early career, but I just thought, no, that's completely ridiculous.
So Beckham as right wing back.
Yeah, I think what you remember with Bex is a lot of people are critical of Bex because all he won while he was out in Spain was the one league title, no European Cups, for example, and I think he gets judged against that incorrectly. He basically played half of his career appearances outside England. He obviously also went to MLS. He had a spell at AC Milan, a spell at Paris Saint-Germain. He spent half of his career outside of England, and bossed it for long periods. The story at Madrid when he did win the league, and Fabio Capello, ironically, was refusing to pick him, and he just, determination-wise, got his head down, forced his way back in, and had an absolutely pivotal role in the run-in towards Madrid's pipping Barcelona to that title. And obviously with him, it's the global stuff, right? You can't ignore it. When he went to Madrid from United, it was a huge headline. And he was considered Galactico. He was nowhere near the ability level of Zidane's, Figo's, Brazilian Ronaldo, even obviously Cristiano Ronaldo later on.
Yeah, but he's
was
pretty
on that pedestal. Arguable. I don't think Cristiano would take kindly to that.
But, Cristiano's too pretty. Bex.
Well, Cristiano's a waxwork, let's say it. Second best footballer that ever lived, but he's a waxwork. Yeah. But Bex was put on that pedestal with these players, and that's full credit to him and his determination. I think the fact that he also played in other leagues and did well. He did win the MLS Cup twice in America as well. I think influences his appearance record at Madrid is, I think, more than any other British player to play for them.
Okay. And I think the thing is with Bex and Real Madrid, I look at McManaman, who went there a little bit earlier. I don't know if I'm just thinking like who paved the way or who really made it possible. McManaman was the first Brit to go there for a while, right? And then after Bex, you've got Michael Owen followed and Jonathan Woodgate followed and what have you. So I look back at McManaman going to Real Madrid is a little bit more of a surprise and shock than maybe Beckham going to Real Madrid at the time.
I wouldn't say either particularly opened the doors in terms of Spain. There are others, like one we'll come on to, that perhaps opened the door a little bit in Italy, for example. And there was a spell where in the late 80s, there was a few players going to France and that. But I think the movement of British players to Spain stopped somewhat in the 90s because of the boom of the Premier League. And essentially, it was probably as much money there as there was in Spain at the time. You got to remember in the 80s, you had like Terry Venables went out and managed there. He took Steve Archibald and Gary Lineker with him for Barcelona. So it wasn't unheralded for English players to go to Spain. McManaman, I guess, kind of brought it open into the surface again. He was a Bosman, wasn't he? His contract ran out of Liverpool and he went to Madrid. McManaman was probably the hardest player to leave out of this team. And the reason I say that was 2 league titles, 2 European Cups, including a goal in the final. So I'm on that basis. If you used to do it on honours, McManaman would have to be in it. But I just felt personally I couldn't find the room for him.
No. Next up, you got Gaza. Gaza.
Yeah, you can say it's a little bit personal preference, but a little bit like 10 years ahead of his time of Beckham, like the boom in terms of media, etc. when Gascoigne went.
Yeah.
What's sad about it was essentially Lazio had agreed to buy Gascoigne in the summer of 1991, and Gascoigne broke his leg infamously in the FA Cup final playing for Spurs. Didn't play for 14, 15 months, but in that time it allowed, for example, Channel 4 to get on the trail and get Gazzetta in time and stuff like that. And so suddenly, before Super Sundays had 2 games of football, we were all watching Serie A at 2:00 and Premier League at 4:00. That's what we.
Funny how the world's full circle. It was James Richardson at the time, right, doing Gazzetta on the Sunday morning, and now he is like us doing FPL content for the Premier League. It's a funny.
He's just doing it with a slightly bigger budget. Old James
just a little. But I remember his voice from back then.
All the people in the community have met James Richardson and said like he's an astonishingly nice bloke, and I think this is what you'd expect from just seeing him on the telly and that. Brilliant journalist. When Gazzetta started, every Sunday Channel 4 would advertise Lazio as the appeal for Gascoigne. Until the teams came out and Gascoigne wasn't playing, and they just used to keep switching to it. I remember watching an insane game between Sampdoria and AC Milan, which shouldn't have been scheduled, when Ruud Gullit got the winner for Sampdoria in his first game against Milan in Genoa. But I think Gascoigne's impact in terms of following Italia 90, and Gascoigne was another one who opened doors. I know David Platt was already there, and he'd been to Bari. It was obviously a smaller club, but then obviously went on to say Juventus. But I think Gascoigne brought global appeal to that whole league. It's sad to see in basically his 2 years where he was there before he came back to Rangers. He played like 50 odd games for Lazio. Sad, man. What a player, mate. That guy should have been one of the best footballers in the world in the early 90s and is still... And Euro 96.
Let's talk about your next pick, Graham Souness.
Yeah, I had to put a Scot in there because I thought we'd lose so many listeners otherwise, Suj. I didn't know where else to go. I couldn't put any of them from the forward lines like Archibald, Joe Jordan and that. And Souness was one of the first kind of to break Serie A. He went to Sampdoria. He won an Italian Cup. He went there when he was 31 after basically 250 odd games from Liverpool. That he moved straight out there. And he was largely considered a success as a combative midfielder. And I also made the decision, Suj, consciously, that the amount of attacking players I've got in this team, I did need someone who could put a tackle in. And Graham Souness gets in by winning the Italian Cup for Sampdoria, being able to make a tackle. That's why he's in this team. I'm being Scottish because I could see they'd have been down my throat if I didn't have one in.
I don't mind you having a Scot in there, but I wouldn't have gone with Graham Souness. I tell you, this is one of the picks that I wanted Owen Hargreaves in the midfield. I really wanted Owen Hargreaves in the midfield. For me, not being brought up on football to the extent that you were, he was one of the first players that when he broke out and was as good as he was, people were like, who is this guy? And is he English? It just didn't feel like young English talent could come through elsewhere. Like you look, I know Jadon Sancho was at Man City, but you now look at doing stuff, and he really came to the fore at Dortmund, right? And everyone's like, oh, hang on a second. To make it and get into the England team doesn't mean you have to have been brought up and raised through the English football system. And Owen Hargreaves, for me, was the first player that I actually took notice of. There was, hang on a second, there is a possibility for you to be English and make it outside of England through the youth system.
Right, he's not English. Moving on.
Canadian. Is he Canadian?
Come
on, he's
Canadian,
English.
German, something or other.
He's got England caps, mate.
I did consider Owen Hargreaves, yes. He was at Bayern Munich for about 7 years, but only played about 150 times, which over a 7-year period is not a lot. I'm just talking.
He was injury prone, wasn't he, a little bit?
Well, at selection as well. He burst on the scene. He did amazing for Bayern Munich in the 2001 Champions League final, which really caught everybody's attention back home. So who's this kid and can we get him in the England team before someone else does? And he obviously came on against Germany a few months later for his competitive debut. Quality-wise, if you were to compare Hargreaves and Souness as footballers, Souness in his peak would be well in excess. I mean, what he says about Paul Pogba as a pundit is a different conversation, but Graham Souness was a great footballer, mate. Very underrated, in my opinion, when people refer back to that Liverpool 80s team. So, no, Owen Hargreaves is not eligible. He doesn't make it.
Laurie Cunningham, player I know very, very little about. So you tell everybody why you put Laurie Cunningham in.
I really thought you were going to say a player I know really, really well. There's a good backstory behind Laurie Cunningham. Laurie Cunningham played for a lot of clubs overseas. He was considered for a long time the first black player to play for England at any level. Although someone seems to have dug something out since that there was a black schoolboy who played for England previously. But I think at 21 level, he was the first black player to play for England. He was the first British player bought by Real Madrid. And he's another one who spent majority of his career overseas. He won the league. He won the Del Rey as a left winger for Real Madrid. He also had long spells at Sporting Gijón. He had a spell in France as well. The majority of his career ended as well. He tragically lost his life in a car crash when he was only 33. And a lot of people believe he only got 6 England caps. A lot of people believe it was quite political, the fact that he stopped other people from similar original fight. But yeah, there's a really good backstory behind Laurie Cunningham. He's a sort of one. So we could do a whole pod on him, mate. And he could play proper old-fashioned left winger, mate.
Not going to argue with Laurie Cunningham. Next on the list is one that was.
You still sick?
Yeah, I can still hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, all good.
Oh, lovely, jubbly. Next on your list is one that was probably top, like first one or two names on the list. Gareth Bale.
He's got to be on there, hasn't he?
I mean,
he'd be on there just for the overhead kick in the Champions League final, mate. He'd be shit.
That goal was good. The one where he ran off the pitch and overtook the player. That 1 in 1,000 players is going to do that. He's just an absolute beast. And when you look at it, the honours that he's picked up at Real Madrid, just crazy. I think it's 4 La Ligas, couple of Champions Leagues and so on. He's won it all there. And whilst he's not a fan's, maybe not a fan's favourite or Zidane's favourite, his stats and his performances, I don't think anyone can argue with.
It's got about 80 goals for Real Madrid, mate.
Yeah.
Which actually is probably not what we expected when he made the move from Tottenham in 2013. part of that's through injuries, selections, his love for Wales and golf over Madrid. I don't know, motivation's a bit difficult when you do it all straight away in your first season, like he did. He scored at what was essentially the winning goal in the Champions League final against Atletico Madrid in Lisbon. The two other goals you talk about, you say 1 in 1,000 players who could do that, mate. You're missing about 6 zeros off them. The goal against
I was trying to be generous there, but I mean, yeah, another level.
The goal against Liverpool in the Champions League final, and remember as well that was at 1-1. And the other goal you're talking about is the goal against Barcelona in the Mestalla in the Spanish Cup final. Like, that's ridiculous, mate. He basically goes in the crowd and still outpaces his man and scores. Yeah. And they're in cup finals, mate. So there's no question, honours-wise. Yeah. In terms of technical quality, Bale would deserve to be in this team. And obviously on honours as well. I mean, on honours, he trumps nearly everybody, basically. So he has to be in this team. Yeah. I'd give him a free roll to do whatever he wanted with it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. You've got Kevin Keegan in here now.
Yeah.
I don't dislike Kevin. He was a great player.
When Kevin Keegan went to Hamburg in 1977, he went on to win the Ballon d'Or in 1978 and 1979. Do I need to go further?
No.
He won the Bundesliga twice as well. He was another one who went a little bit like Gascoigne, Bale, and a few others. He went at peak, mate. You know, he came back and played for like Southampton and Newcastle again. He had a good spell at Newcastle. He'd obviously been at Liverpool before he went to Hamburg. It was a big deal. He tore it up in the Bundesliga. He was basically considered at that time one of the best players in Europe. And through our memories, Suj, because like England never qualified for 1978, and I think he was unfit basically in 1982 for the start of the tournament. Our memories of Keegan are probably a little bit different to those more in the detail. We don't remember him really as great for England, although he was great for England, but he never got the chance to show it at a major tournament. And I think that's why, for a lot of people, he gets forgotten from our memories in comparison to, say, Gascoigne at 90 and 96. There's a legacy, whereas perhaps with Keegan, there isn't so much. But Kevin Keegan, make no mistake, at that time was one of the best players in Europe and was voted so 2 years in a row. That's not a fluke, mate.
No.
So Kevin Keegan deserves his place in this team for me.
The last player that you've got in there up front, I had to think about, like, I don't have any real reason not to have him in, but it did make me think, was there not anyone better that went overseas? You've got Gary Lineker in there, who had a spell at Grampus and a spell at Barcelona.
What do you mean a spell at Grampus? Don't compare those two clubs, mate.
No, but I mean, you're talking about where he went overseas. He was at Barca and then obviously eventually Grampus and whatever else. Gary Lineker will admit himself that he wasn't technically the best forward, best footballer, but he made the most of what he had. At the same time, like 10 years old, Italia 90, falling in love with football. Gary Lineker was golden boy at the time, right? He was the one that everybody loved. So I grew up on Gary Lineker in Italia 90, so I still think he's a top player and dude. I just didn't know if there were other options that may have been better.
And those are a couple of years older than us as well, so we obviously remember him fondly from 86 as well. Not many people can claim a World Cup hat-trick like Lineker has, as he did in 86. That was against Poland, the hat-trick, wasn't it? Yeah. In the group stage, which got England through. And then he obviously got the consolation goal in the quarter-final defeat to Argentina as well before finishing top goal scorer in 1990. He's had that spell at Barcelona in between those two World Cups, at the very peak of his career. His stats aren't as great as they look because he was actually quite often used in a wide position, astonishingly, for Barcelona. In terms of movement in the box and finishing, he was an astonishing footballer. Because you're quite right to say, technical ability, he didn't really have it. But I tell you what, if the ball dropped in the box, he'd score, finish. He was always in the right place. Think Michael Owen, but 10 times a better predator is what I would say. And obviously not Lineker, and
10 times less pace.
Well, Lineker was quick. I mean, but Owen had obviously
Owen was rapid.
Pace. You imagine Lineker with the rest of this team, the deliveries of Cunningham, Beckham, the support from Gascoigne, Bale and Keegan. Yeah, I mean,
it'd be on the end of everything.
Exactly. So
Yeah,
doesn't matter. He was a supreme finisher. He obviously played for Spurs when I first went. I've never seen a better finisher. I wouldn't put him with the elites. And there are better players I've seen for Spurs. Like I would say Kane is a much better player than Lineker, for example.
Berbatov.
But in terms of finishing, astonishing Lineker. He was such a good finisher. He was ice cool, mate. So for me, it would be him. Cup Winners' Cup with Barcelona. Obviously lost the European Cup final as well. And obviously did win the Liga as well. So for me, Lineker would be in.
Who did you leave out that you really were gutted? I mean, we spoke about McManaman. We've spoken about Greaves.
McManaman was one. The other really, really bad ones were also two Spurs players, Chris Waddle and Glenn Hoddle, who had spells in
Marseille, Monaco. And
Hoddle with Monaco. But particularly Chris Waddle played nearly 100 times for Marseille, I think, won 3 Ligue 1s in a row. Just in comparison to, say, Beckham, Cunningham and kind of Keegan and Bale and that, I just couldn't justify it. Basically, probably partly because it was Ligue 1 as well.
Yeah, I mean,
Waddle was a
right?
fantastic footballer. Yeah. I mean, Hoddle, if you're picking on quality, Hoddle would get in over, say, Souness, for example, in my opinion. That's probably a biased Tottenham opinion. Hoddle only played about 50 times for Monaco when Spurs had let him go towards the end of his career. And I know he came back and played for Swindon and Chelsea as well, but it was very much kind of his international career was finished, essentially. Wenger, he actually played for Wenger at Monaco. If you ever get the chance to hear Wenger talk about Hoddle, you would think Hoddle was the best player that Wenger ever had over all the Arsenal players. He raves about Hoddle whenever he talks about him. He was a genius. Waddle was an electrifying winger. Brilliant, brilliant player. Listeners who are our age probably remember him most for his Premier League spell at Sheffield Wednesday when he came back. And I'm not sure if he did win Football of the Year. I think he might have, but certainly one year he should have. He was great when he came back as well. So he was a tough one to leave out. Paul Lambert at Borussia Dortmund was another one.
Did you give Paul Ince any chance?
Paul Ince, yeah. Paul Ince, Inter Milan. Was the other one you said?
No, that was the only one I said.
Yeah, Paul Ince at Inter Milan was great, right? I kind of discounted it a bit because there was no trophies won, but then you can say the same about Gascoigne at Lazio, right? So I just felt Gascoigne was A, the better player, and B, had a bigger global impact, perhaps for us as viewers, to the fact that we all got into Serie A, and then perhaps it opened doors, like you say, for people like Paul Ince, for example. He would have been close. Paul Lambert, as I said, he won the European Cup at Borussia Dortmund and was a great little player at Celtic. So, I mean, the midfield was it was a disaster class of who to leave out, mate. Ridiculous.
We can settle by just saying they'd all been on the bench to come on at 65 minutes and 70 minutes.
We've got about 11 midfielders on the bench, mate. David Platt's another one we've hardly spoken about. Obviously, he had Bari, Juventus, Sampdoria. Trevor Francis also had a great spell at Sampdoria. There's some brutal ones, mate. John Collins, Monaco, just having a look. Ray Wilkins, AC Milan, PSG. There's a theme in that midfield area. So I went balance of one English, one Scottish, one attacking, one defensive, Gascoigne and Souness.
There we
Awful.
go.
Awful to pick.
So you know what we need you guys to do as listeners to the show? Please jump on Twitter. James is there at Planet FPL Pod. I'm there at Suj and Shah. And jump in the comments on the YouTube video or on Twitter on the pinned tweet for the show. And tell us who we've left out that you think should be in the team as well. There's going to be plenty of players that we haven't mentioned that you may do, and we'll jump in and interact with you there. So there we go. We're going to put the poll out again on Sunday, right?
Yeah, we'll do, absolutely.
Are you putting any options back in?
Well, the two that come second, yes, we'll probably do something similar to this next week, actually, because it's going to look weird having two of these choices and not another two. So it'll probably be quite something similar, a best 11. I'd like you to do that I'm going to be biased now, that PL Club one with no European players. I think
me too.
fun.
Me too. But we shouldn't bias the vote.
we've just done it. Well, people have still got to remember to do it on Sunday, right? And we might have zombies by Sunday. Who knows? I just want to say on this particular one, I'm happy to debate it out because I'm not even convinced about the team that I've picked myself. And if you can find me good fullbacks who are British and have played overseas, I'd love to hear. Tony DeRigo had a little spell at Torino, but I'm not having it. Kieran Trippier, I'm not having it. Like, not in 6 months, Atletico. If he's won the Champions League when football restarts in 18 months, then yeah, Kieran Trippier can go in. So yeah, particularly fullbacks and goalkeepers, if you've got anyone, and centre halves, I want to hear it because there ain't many good ones.
There we go. We've got more content coming at you this week as well. So don't forget to make sure you're subscribed and hit the like and notification bell and whatever else you need to do on all your podcast platforms. We've got a quiz tomorrow, the FA Cup between 2010 and 2019. James is going to be putting together 20 questions. So join us for that. That's going to be a lot of fun. On Thursday's Throwback Thursday, we are looking at Norwich from the 90s, a team that nearly won the league, had some giant killing victories in the European competitions, and then now at bottom of the table. But we'll talk about them in their glory days as well. And Friday, James will be live streaming, and by then maybe the Champ Man game is going to be live as well. So we'll be talking about that too. So do stay tuned. Do make sure you share the podcast with all your football, FPL, fantasy football loving friends, family, frenemies, whoever they are. Stay safe. Ciao for now.
Be nice to each other. Cue music, man. Sharp.